My Gavanen, and well met. I'm Arachír Galudirithon, head of Divide and Conquer, and welcome to the Breeland and the Shire faction overview. Some of you requested Dunland, some of you requested Run, but I saw Breeland was yet to do, and I was sold. So here we are with Bree. I have no other preliminary things to mention, I don't think. Nothing comes to mind, so let's dive straight in. Beginning with game start. Now, as you can see from the screen immediately, you have a reasonably prosperous game start. You have the entirety of the Shire, from Michael Delving in the west to Deep Hallow in the east, and down to Arachír, the crossing into the Shire. And you have Bree and Arachír. Obviously, of course, Hobbiton and Sackville. So these 7 provinces make up the entirety of your start of the game. You don't have any armies standing around anywhere waiting to ambush or do anything like that. Everyone is in a town. You also begin the game with these 2 forts, and you can garrison them at your leisure. Forts have 4 free upkeep slots, so they're very, very useful for garrisoning your army. Now, in terms of your starting army, you don't really get that much. You get some woodland hunters, some woodland or lumbermen. There is 1 unit of gatekeepers guarding the gate, ironically, of Bree. They are your best unit. I'll talk about that more in the second half. Down at Arachír, you have one very interesting general called Brethor. Yes, you can see him just here. We'll pull him out. And that is because Brethor is a Dunedain. Or Dunedain, as a singular would suggest. And he has Dunedain bodyguards as his bodyguard. So he is quite a good little bodyguard, so it's quite worth keeping him alive. There is also an example of the Bree unique strategy models. No longer are you the green tabard wearing Arnor man with an Arnor general as your captain. You now have Bree mercenaries as your captain, as your general, Breeland militia as your captain, and the slightly heavily armoured watchman as your faction leader. There he is, just there. He's just been ambushed. Just given away that there's an ambush there. That's annoying. But there's your faction leader. He has a breastplate and wears the typical green of the watchman regiments. So that's the beginning of the game for Bree. Oh, also, of course, it's worth noting that the 4 generals in the 4 Shire provinces are all hobbits.
Yes, my lord.
And you'll have to forgive the fact that Alf is clearly just Sam, with a tried to make him look a little bit different. And you get Banderbrass archers as your bodyguard. They are the best units that the hobbits can field, and they're available in the Shire. But we'll talk about those in a little bit, concerned in the script section. So, in terms of Rebel expansion, where can you hope to go at the beginning of the game as the forces of Bree? Well, unfortunately, you can only hope to go south. To your north, you are completely surrounded by the Northern Dunedain. The Weather Hills here, culminating in the great peak of Weathertop, or Amun Sul, which is just in the trees there, I believe next to the lumber. To the north, just at the base of these hills, is Fornost, and to the far west on the shores of Lake Evendeem is Anuminas. And they will all be taken by the Northern Dunedain, so you'll be surrounded entirely on your eastern and northern fronts by the Northern Dunedain. There are 2 rebel provinces to the east, actually, but they are very quickly snapped up by either the forces of Linden or the forces of Ered Lyn. And they are under Towers, which is the village just here. Again, rather unimaginatively underneath the towers, the Tower Hills there, Elastirion, the tower holding the Elven Palantir. And you can also take the town just up here, which I cannot remember the name of. I named it. I named all the ones in this region, apart from the ones we knew. But I can't remember what it is. But there's quite a large, well-built-up town in the northwest, just here, sorry, which is a pretty prize for any Breeland general. But Linden do try and snap them quickly. So if you do hope to go west, you've got to jump at the chance. You've got to mobilise fast. But the predominantly free lands are all to the south, between Erunvor, the province of Enedwaith, and then there's this whole gap here. Cardolan is virtually completely deserted, apart from the Arachír. Matraith, a very large city, just here, or a large town, sorry, which at game start is a very, very, very pretty prize, is just south away down there. To the west down here there's a town where these 3 rivers are. And the name reflects that, but I can't remember what it is. There's also a fort in the foothills of the southern range of the Blue Mountains just here, which is available. And, of course, the Argond, the wooden castle on the Gwathlo. Of course, Enedwaith hold the crossing just here, and they hold Erunvor, so they will likely take the peninsula here very quickly, so that will not really be open to you. But if you get there very quickly, that will still be rebel. But of course, the great threat will come from the fact that both Tharbads are owned by Dunland after the turn 1 auto-expansion. And as much as you might think that Angmar will be your chief enemy as Bree, you will probably find that the bulk of this campaign will be fought against the forces of Dunland and not Angmar. And I must say right now that Bree are easily my third favourite faction after Dol Amroth and Dorwinion, and I've played them many times, and in almost every single campaign I have completely ignored Angmar, because by taking Dunland out of the equation, Northern Dunedain are therefore free to completely focus on Angmar, which they do, and combined with Ered Luin they bring Angmar down. So Dunland will be your chief enemy. But then, as I said, there's nothing to your east. The Northern Dunedain will take the castle just here, so they'll be there, and they also get Amunsul, so they'll surround you there. So there's a few rebel provinces between you and the Gwathlo. Alright, that brings you on to your neighbours. Let's first of all look at who you are allied with. The Northern Dunedain and the forces of Linden, the Grey Havens of Linden. They are your initial game start allies. So the Northern Dunedain capitalled in Fenestruanin in the Angle, and Egladil, I believe it's called in Sindarin, and that's just here. And of course, Linden, everybody should know, it capitalled at Mythlond, the Grey Havens. Quite literally means Grey Havens, Mythlond, Grey Havens, and that is just around there below the Silk. Obviously, Linden also have the entire dagger-looking Gulf of Lune, so they are your western neighbours. To the north, of course, you have the dwarves of Ered Luin, who will quickly make their way east to attack the forces of Angmar, who are even further north, coming from Carn Dum. To the east, beyond the forces of the Northern Dunedain, of course, you have Imladris in the Vale of Imladris, and you have the Misty Mountains in the mountains of their namesake. And as we've already mentioned, to your south you have Enedwaith and Dunland, two upstart wildman clans ripe for civilization to come and press its boot firmly against their throats. So Dunland and Enedwaith to your south. And of course, as you saw from the diplomacy, your enemies are indeed the Dunlendings, who hate you at the beginning of the game. Indeed you are at war. And the forces of Angmar, who are also at war with you in their quest to claim all of Eriador for the name of the Shadow. I haven't touched on Mengelin in the Rebel Provinces because I'll talk about that in the scripts if you're wondering why. Right, on to economy, and this is where Bree has been a thorn in our sides, the modders, for some time, because Bree should not be a strong faction. Their best units, like the Wildmen factions, can only really counter the medium tier units of the factions around them. So Linden vastly outclass you. The Northern Dunedain would absolutely sweep you away if they turned on you. And if you hope to attack Gondor, then they would crush you too. I mean, even Isengard will crush you. Your elite units do not have very much in terms of stats. Cover that in the second half, of course, but just so that you're aware. However, the AI found somewhat of a loophole in Bree, and they had so much money that they could pump out thousands upon thousands of weak units, and they essentially overran Eriador. They completely overran them. So we've done absolutely everything that we can think of in an attempt to make the AI weaker, and I believe we have finally found a way to make them... We don't want them to be crushed every single time, because they wouldn't be. And obviously it's total war. This is a parallel universe to the, shall we say, real universe of the Legendarium, of the books of Tolkien's universe. So in this fake past, we are of course assuming that Bree will actually fight. So we didn't want them to be destroyed, but we also didn't want them to be the powerhouse that they were, and I believe we found a happy equilibrium. So hopefully you feel the same as well, and Bree's not too strong. But this was what I'm talking about this on the economy section, because it's very easy to make money as Bree, and this is all thanks to the Shire. The Shire has an unbelievable amount of resources, which are almost only found in the Shire, and ergo are highly prized, because although you might not see the inner workings of trade in this game, resources do actually have a massive impact. So for example, the Vale of Anduin is one of the only places where you will find honey, as you can see denoted by these honeycombs. And because honey is so rare, it's therefore quite valuable. So Anduin can get quite a lot of money through trade. And the same is true of Bree, because you own the Shire. And the Shire has that most rare of resources, which, if we can find... I say it's rare, it's so rare I can't even find it. And there it is, pipeweed. Which is a very, very wealthy resource, and it is one that only Bree has. So they have access to a very, very rich resource, and the Shire itself is just filled with resources. You can see there's orchards all over the place, there's wool farming, of shepherding, there's grain as well, so there's good resources here. In addition, these villages that you see dotted about whilst we've used them to mark the Hobbit villages as well, so there's a nice little trade there. They aren't just pretty for the map, they are actually a resource. Villages will bring you money, and the Shire has quite a few little villages dotted around as well, so it's such a gold mine. Well, a proverbial gold mine, because there's no gold, but it does give you so much money. It's incredibly useful.
Orders, my lord.
And you can get so much money if you trade. So if you pursue a path of peace and try and trade with as many people as possible, you'll become fantastically wealthy. And couple that with the fact that your middle tier units don't actually cost very much, then you'll see that you can earn a lot of money. But in an attempt to counter the fact that Bree shouldn't really have an organised military and to try and make them weaker,
yes, my lord,
we drastically increased the upkeep of most of their units. The lumbermen and the woodland hunters are an aside. They're both under 150, as you see there. But if I can bring up... am I on the right control? Yes, I am. I can't even get Bree militia. There we are. Breeland militia. 220 for your... terrible, as we'll see in the video, statted units, and as the units go up in quality as well, they also just get very expensive. So Bree is very easy to make money, but on the flip side, your units cost quite a lot when their stats aren't particularly amazing, and that's because obviously they're not a formidable army, they're not a professional army. They need support, they need money. It's much like mercenaries. Mercenaries won't fight for you once they're stopped being paid, once they're not being paid. So, and it's similar sort of vein. These people want to return to their families. They don't care about what's happening in Gondor. They don't care about the elves. They don't care about anything. And as far as they're concerned in the true lore, there isn't even anything to worry about anyway. Very few of them are even aware of the threat that is posed to Bree. But anyway, that's an aside. So you can earn quite a lot of money as Bree. Now, in terms of construction, similar sort of to Rohan, you can't get the highest city size, which is a large city. You can go up to a minor city, and that is it. But that's the only restriction. You can build castles, and you can build many other things. We'll cover the guilds. You get quite a few. You get the Merchants Guild, courtesy of Anno 1404. If you played that game, you'll recognise those 3 buildings there. But that's the Merchants Guild. Possibly for yourselves. You get the Archers Guild, as you've already seen with the Northern Dunedain, so obviously just gives you bonus to archers. And you get oh no, the Gathering Halls is your... oh, there is one more thing. You get the Dunedain. Now in the second half of this video I've not put the Dunedain in, because obviously they're just Northern Dunedain, and this flows into the scripts section that we are getting into now. And that is this building just here, the Dunedain Outpost. Now, as you can see, it allows you to train rangers, the base, a good solid Dunedain unit, and it allows you to train blade masters. It gives you a free upkeep, and it allows you 1 recruitment slot. And the building itself is quite cheap. It doesn't cost very much money. I think it costs about 1,000. However, you can only build it in Arket, Ixan, and I believe Northern Tharbad and possibly Amun-Sul if you take Amun-Sul. So you can only get it in a few places, and in addition to only being able to get it in a few places, the units that train from it take ages to replenish. It's meant to show you that the Dunedain are supporting you, but they're not going to be your army. So if we recruit these Blade Masters, it is then 50 turns until we can recruit them again. And the archers are the same. And that does not change after the barracks event. So they really are one-off style units. You can get 2 from Arket and you can get 2 from Ixan, obviously. So you can have 4 units of Dunedain in an army, and that will be it for 50 turns. Unless you can take Northern Tharbad, or you can take Amun-Sul if it falls. So it's just a nice little added feature, but they won't form the bulk of your army. Right, another script which affects Bree, which isn't really a script but it's a nice little side, is, as you saw when I came to Bree, from the Prancing Pony you are able to train some Dwarven Travellers. Now there's nothing particularly special about these because their upkeep's 250 and they're not as good with their bows as the Woodland Hunters, which are a staple Breeland unit. But it is just a nice little touch that, because the Dwarven travel which comes through Bree, heading from the west to the east, we like to add in a little feature whereby you can train a few dwarves. So you can get some dwarves in Bree. The other script which can affect you if you choose it to is Mengelin, which quite literally means Greenway. And this village here has a script related to it, the Barrow Downs. And if you take Mengelin, until you upgrade it, there is a building in it called the Barrow Downs, and what it will do is it will constantly spawn Barrowites in the hills to your west. Now there's they will spawn intermittently, so they'll be all over the place. But then after a short while, they'll combine into one large army, and they will siege Mengeland. They will try and take it back. And the only way to stop them, obviously you can beat them, and then the cycle will start again. But the only way to stop them is to upgrade Mengeland to a town, because it starts as a village. So upgrade it to a town, and then upgrade the Barrow Downs, and they become restored Barrow Downs or restored crypts or something like that. And then you get a bonus to your happiness, and you no longer get any of these attacks occurring on Mengeland. And that is how you stop the script. But until then, Mengeland can be a bit of a pain, because obviously it's virtually in the heart of your empire, because you'll quickly take Matraith probably, and then you'll very quickly be at Tharbad. So Mengeland will be far away from the front line, and yet it still gets attacked. And it can be quite an issue trying to deal with it, and so it's just a nice little script, which is a thorn in your side. And I'm always fond of thorns in your side. And those are the scripts for Bree. Right, so finally difficulty. I must admit that I've never had a problem with Bree. I've always found it very, very easy. Even though their units aren't amazing, because your enemies' units aren't particularly amazing in Enadwaith and Dunland, you kind of are like for like, and you sort of match each other. So then it just comes down to your tactical skill versus the AI's tactical skill. And in 9 times out of 10, a human will always be better on the battlefield than the computer. So when your armies are completely matched and deadlocked, the addition of a human versus an AI means you'll win. So likelihood is Bree is a very easy campaign. Now the only time I've struggled with Bree is in one occasion when the Northern Dunedain was swept away by Angmar really quickly, and the flood of Angmar just completely washed me away. And Bree was besieged 2 or 3 times. I lost some of the provinces in the Shire. It was a disaster. I did fight back and I did manage to kick them out, but it was an actual challenge. So there is that to mention. Now another thing to just briefly touch on before we change to the unit side is that Bree is a custom settlement, courtesy of Devil's Advocate, and then edited by Jox25, who I believe is now Mr. J. And so Bree is a custom settlement. It's not just a custom look on the map, it's custom on the battle map as well. And it's quite an interesting little one to defend. As you might imagine, it is not very strategic to defend. It's not very easy. It's a long straight road, and that's about it. It's not as easy to defend as Fornost or Numinas, which are very cool and very easy to defend. So do bear that in mind. Alright, and that's the campaign side. Oh, I will also, just as it's loading up, I'll just say I'm very much aware that Barleyman Butterbeer, the proprietor of the Prancing Pony, would not be the mayor of Bree. But this is a total war game, and a faction has to have a leader. They cannot have a leader. And our choice was making some random mayor up who no one has heard of, no one even knows if he exists, or we can choose a character who we know exists, and it will be a little bit of a laugh to have him as the mayor of Bree. So what we've done with Bree is we've given them this sort of structure whereby the rich folk and the nobles sit on this council of Bree, and it's headed up by the mayor of Bree itself. And we've made Barlaman the mayor of Bree, and so he is your faction leader. But in no way, of course, are we suggesting that Barlaman would have been the head of Bree. It was just so that you had someone who you actually knew to be your leader. Originally it was someone called, I think he was called Bob or something like that, and he just had a random picture of like an English countryman, and by that I mean like a village idiot style picture, and it just never really, I just never really thought it was that good, so we went with Barlaman and we stuck with him. Right, now unlike the evil factions, I've played Bree many times and know exactly who does what in which ranks, so we'll line them all up. I've put the hobbits first, even though they don't strictly fulfill that initial role. And also I'm not really going to talk about the Dwarven Travellers, because they are just a carbon copy of the Dwarven Traveller unit. You can just train them. So we'll have a little look at them, but they don't really fit into your structure. They can only be trained in one location, and they're really, really rare. It's the same reason why you won't see the why you cannot see the Dunedain in this video either, because they're covered in the Dunedain video. So if you want to know about them, then obviously watch the Dunedain video. But you don't really get as many tiers as I've shown here, but they're all sort of intermingle a bit. But this is essentially the makeup of Bree's army. So just have a little look at the Travellers. That's what they look like. There's your Dwarven Travellers. And they're reasonably good with 10 defense, 6 attack, 3 missile, 3 charge, but nothing special. But right, the first units you're likely to use are the Hobbits. Hobbits are obviously only available in the Shire. They're very slow replenishment, and they're only available from the Smiles, or the Smeals, or the Smules, the building that the Hobbits live in, the holds, which are only built in Bree and the Shire. So you can also get them in Bree, or you can retrain them in Bree, one of the things like that. And there's two distinct tiers: your basics, which are Hobbitry in arms, Hobbit archers, and then the slightly better Banderbrass archers. So we'll start with the Hobbitry in arms. There they are. Now they have not actually that bad stats. I really want to say that Hobbits are terrible, but they're much better than Snagger, and they can even go toe-to-toe with the Goblin ranks. So they are actually quite useful, but they are massively let down by their very poor morale. They will flee very quickly, so you do have to keep an eye on that. But their defense is obviously only 3, their attack's 3 and charges 2, but they're slightly better stats than a Snagger, so that's why I mentioned it. They get a bonus in forest and grassland, but nothing in desert and snow. And interestingly, these ones are effective against armor, which is probably why they're actually not too bad. And that's because of their peculiar weapon systems that they've all got there, and so they're effective against armor. I didn't actually know that, I must admit. I've never noticed that they were effective against armor, so that's an amusement to me. Right, the Hobbit archers and the Banderbrass archers, as you might notice, can both hide anywhere. They can obviously use flaming missiles, and they have excellent stamina, but they can't use stakes, the Hobbit archers. So they've not got stakes, so do keep that in mind. But again, their stats are pretty poor, 2, 2, 2, 2, nothing special there, and the morale is poor, and the morale response is poor. Now, instead of going over every single stat in massive detail, I realise that you can just pause the video and have a look yourself. So I'll say each stat, but I'm not going to go into the detail I've been going into, unless the unit really calls for it. Right, Banderbrass archers are the slightly more armoured, slightly better, well-armoured version, as you can see immediately, with a defence of 6, most of that being in the armour with 4. Their missile is 3, their melee is 3, so similar sort of stats in attack to the others, but the extra armour means they survive a lot longer on the battlefield. Again, they cannot use stakes, but they can, again, hide anywhere, and for the first time in a Hobbit unit, they have average morale and average morale response. And there's the other minor stats, you can have a read of those. Right, and then we come to the first real tier. These units are available mostly everywhere. Lumbermen and woodland hunters require a forest region, as you can see. Oh, it doesn't say it. Oh, I've got to write that in. No, sorry, they don't require a forest region. The building that they come from requires a forest region. So whilst these don't need to say requires a forest region on their plaque, because they come from a building which you can only build in certain regions. So indirectly they're restricted by forest regions, but them not directly within the file structure. So they're not available everywhere, but forest is one of the most common of the types ascribed to each region, so you'll find them available in a lot of places. But these are your initial and most readily available units. Many's the time I've defended a village with Breeland militia, even though I was thinking I was going to lose. So don't count these guys out, but when you see their stats, you'll likely think that they're gone. With only 2, 2, and 5, they're not doing particularly well. But they do get a bonus against mounts. They've got good stamina, which is quite good, but their morale is poor and the morale response is poor. So they're only benefited by the fact they've got quite good shields. 2 point in shield skill is quite good. Like the highest shield skill I think is around 5 or 6. So for a militia to have a 2 shield is actually very good. But obviously, as I say, the morale is poor. But there are 203 of them, so do bear that in mind. Their counterpart are the archers. Bree Archer Militia, as he's just shouted. Now again, they cannot use stakes, and their stats are virtually identical, except they've not got the shield and they've got a bow of 2 as well. But again, poor morale response, but there are 178 of them. Archers of this type are never anything special. The more of these you have, the better, because then they'll have even more arrows, and more arrows means more damage. But an individual unit of them will not really do anything, and they are massively superfluous to their neighbour, and the very much underrated, as a user on YouTube said, and I thoroughly agree with, the Woodland Hunters. Woodland Hunters are a very, very interesting unit, because as you can see from their defence, first of all, they've only got 3 defence. 2 of that in defence skill and 1 in armour, which means arrows obliterate these guys, absolutely obliterate them. And their defence skill is only 2 with armour of 1 when they get into battle anyway, so a poor morale of 3. Their melee and their charge is only 2, so exactly the same as the Bree Archer Militia. But, as you can see, they have a 5 missile attack. That is only 1 lower than normal standard human ranger level attack. So Dunedain Rangers are Thala Rangers. Ithilien Rangers, Castamir's Rangers, they all have about a 6 missile attack, and these have a 5. And these units are available from the start of the game. They are the unsung heroes of the Bree campaign, and they will do a lot of damage if the enemy does not get to them. But, as I have said, when the enemy does get to them, they absolutely slaughter them. So keep them out of battle, and they'll win the battle for you. Let them get attacked, and your chances are all over. And the counterpart to the Woodland Hunters, and the first unit that you'll get mainstream that can do damage against heavy armour, are the Lumbermen. The Lumbermen have effective against armour traits, you can see there. Excellent stamina, because obviously they are Lumbermen. They work out in the fields, physical. They work out in the forests. They have a 5 attack coupled with effective against armour, which means they are slayers. They are raw slayers, especially early in the game. Their charge bonus is 5 as well, so their initial attack is catastrophic. But because they've got a terrible defense of 3 with only 1 and 2 again arrow fire will slaughter them, and again in prolonged melee they will likely fall because the enemy will kill them quicker than they can kill the enemy. Their stats in terms of morale are poor as well, and poor morale response. You don't really want these guys in a defensive line, you always want to be attacking with them. I know that most strike infantry, as I call them, you always want to attack with strike infantry anyway, but it is especially apparent for the Lumbermen because they will die a lot if they are left in the defensive line. And that's that point. Right, on to the first sort of middle tier. These are the real mainstream units, and these are the Watchmen units. Close to my heart because they are, to date, the only unit I have ever modelled or ever put any time into how they look, and unfortunately they are just a cut and paste job from a Dalian unit, but I removed anything that wasn't that green tabard. Years ago I did this, and it took me ages to get Emperor of Hell to accept them into the mod, and I was very pleased when he did. And then with a little bit of editing from others, they've been finished off because my knowledge of unit creation goes as far as cutting and pasting. But someone else did the quivers, and someone else did the designs on the shields. I think it was Hummingbird, possibly Zarathos. But anyway, these are the 3 Watchmen units. There's Watchman Bowguard, Watchman Axeguard, and Watchman Swordguard. They've got quite a little interesting backstory as well, which I slaved over writing, so do feel free to have a read of that. They are the 3 mainstream units, as I've said, and they cover the 3 aspects. You've got an aggressive, a defensive, and an archer. But contrary to what you might believe, the Axe Guard, I believe, are the defensive nature. Oh no, I did change that round. Initially the Axe Guard were the defensive ones and the swords were the aggressive, but that was foolish and I swapped it around. So we'll start with the swordmen. These are your swordmen. There's nothing particularly special about them here. As you can see, they can make a shield wall and they have excellent stamina, which is good. They have a good morale and good morale response, or average morale response, so they're not going to be running away too quickly. But their real strength shines through in their quite good attack for a medium style unit, and their reasonably good defense as well. Now when I say medium style unit, I of course mean medium style in the Wildmen category. Their stats are reminiscent of Gondor Militia, so it again gives you an idea of how technologically behind you are as Bree, and how like the elite forces of Angmar will absolutely destroy you. So if you do ever have to fight Angmar, if they've got any of those Witch Realm units, your days are pretty much done and numbered. But anyway, so those are the Sword Guard. 9 attack, charge 4, but the defense shines through with a 3, and 7 of that in armor. So they're quite effective against arrows, given that they've also got the shield of 3, the armor of 7, so the arrows aren't going to be doing too well against them. Now the aggressive wing are the Axe Guard. As you can see, 1 less on the armor, so only a total defense of 12, but their attack is 7, but their charge is double the Sword Guard charge. Their attack is lower, but they're effective against armor. And this is high. The attack is lower because obviously they have a heavier weapon, and so it's not going to be as effective, but it can pierce armor. So they are quite strong in that regard. They have a powerful charge as listed on the side and good stamina. But their morale is good, and their morale response is impetuous. So not only can they survive very well from morale shocks, they're also likely to charge the enemy if not left on defensive mode. And when they're actually attacking the enemy, even on defensive mode, they will probably push out and chase the enemy. That's generally what impetuous means. In terms of how this game reads it, I mean, of course. Right, and then the next thing to support them are the Bow Guard. Just standard archers. But again, as you will note, these are your mainline archers, and they still don't have as good a missile attack as the Woodland Hunters. But they have triple the defense of the Woodland Hunters and over double the attack. 2.5 times the attack. So they are vastly superior to the woodland hunters, but in terms of raw ranged damage, they are inferior. But they can use sharpened stakes. They're adept at hiding in woods, which means that there are 3 tiers of hiding: available to hide, good at hiding, and hide anywhere. And adept at hiding in woods is good at hiding, the middle tier. They have good stamina, so not excellent stamina. They're not going to last forever, but again, good morale and average morale response. And they get a bonus against wargs, which is quite interesting to see there. They don't get a bonus against wargs, and neither do they. Oh, they do get a bonus against wargs, sorry. And they get a bonus against Oliphants and wargs. So this entire Watchman unit, because of your lack of spear units, these 3 fill your warg killers. But you don't have anything in this early stage apart from the Breeland militia, who actually get a bonus against just all types of cavalry. They're the only unit with a bonus against horses. Otherwise, in this entire first tier and your second tier until you get the Greenway Guards, these are the only ones that will deal with wargs, and nothing really will deal with horses, because these are very, very weak, and if they're coming up against a cavalry charge, they're likely to be done for anyway. So those are your middle tier. And now, at this next tier, the Greenway Guards are an AOR, as are the sentries, the mounted equivalent. So they're only available in regions which the Greenway passes through. Now I believe this is Fornost, Bree, Mengelon, Metraith and Northern Tharbad. I believe it stops there. I can't remember if I made it go further on. No, it does stop there because the Greenway is a specific part of the Great North-South Road. So they're only available in those locations, but they more than make up for that with the fact that they are quite good. They are essentially the spear counterpart of the 3 Watchman units. Initially they used to be Bree's incredibly overpowered unit, but we weakened them a bit because we didn't need any overpowered units. That didn't fit with the ethos that we were going with Bree. So we weakened them somewhat, and they are in line with the stats of the Watchman units, but they are good against all types of cavalry. They have average morale and average morale response, so better morale than the than the Watchman units. But they haven't got good or excellent stamina, so you do have to watch out for that. They can, of course, as well make a shield wall, as you can see just there, but otherwise the stats are very, very similar. Right, and a counterpart to them, and originally in a medium tier role, but now edited to be in a higher tier thanks to the mercenary spin that we've given the merchant militia, and the clear breastplate that they are apparently wearing. We've since made these guys very heavily armoured. So their armour, you may see their defence is 15 and you'll be like, oh, but that's similar to the Watchman units, as you can see here, 13, 12. But as you will see, their defence is 15, but 12 of that is in their armour. They have no defence skill whatsoever. So, which is actually a real positive. These are very, very good against arrows. They will not fall to arrow fire easily. Of their defence, all 15 of that is going to be blocking arrow fire because the shield and the armour both count toward arrows. But to counter their very high armour and their very high defence, their attack is not wonderful and their charge isn't very good. They are mercenaries in every sense of the word, and not good mercenaries. These are not the kind of Viking mercenaries who have made a name for themselves and are called up in the gravest of battles to turn the tide. These aren't like Knights Templar. They're not going to swing battles with their heavy armour, but they are heavily armoured, but they counter that with poor attack, poor morale, and poor morale response. So they're a bit of a I can't remember the thing, a double-bladed, double-edged sword, double-something sword, and it just means they've got a good side and a bad side. Every cloud has a silver lining is a more apt description. Right, and both of the units we've just seen have a mounted division. It's sentries for the Greenway and merchant cavalry. Interesting of note that merchant cavalry are your only available everywhere cavalry unit. Highlighting, I didn't do the overarching sweep at the beginning, but highlighting that Bree are not a cavalry faction at all. Your general rides cavalry, yes, but that's likely to be the only cavalry you will get until after the barracks event, so you've really got to find ways to win without cavalry. Siege equipment is of course how you do that, so use that wisely. But these are your 2 mounted ones. The sentries are essentially the guards, but mounted, as you can see. Slightly worse attack, but a better charge. Same defense, and same stats here. Although their secondary attack is 7, so once they've done their initial charge, they're actually not too bad in prolonged melee. So they're a cavalry unit which favours prolonged melee over the initial charge, so do bear that in mind. Next up are the merchant cavalry, and they follow exactly the same vein as the others, except their shield is worse because it's ever so slightly smaller. And shields are a lot more cumbersome to control when you're on a horse, especially when you're not a trained professional. You're just a money-grabbing merchant or mercenary. They're called merchant cavalry, but they are the mercenaries hired by the merchants who traverse the lands of Eriador. So they're not; these aren't the actual merchants. But anyway, as you can see there again, an very high armor of 12. Their attack is slightly better, so they are better than the foot division, the merchant militia, because they have got one higher attack and a better charge. So do bear that in mind. And again, they're pretty solid cavalry thanks to their high armor and reasonable attack. So they're not going to let you down too quickly. Alright, an interesting point is to talk about the Breeland bodyguards, because they have a quite interesting look with the feathers in their hats and the spears and whatnot. They're a twist on the Greenway sentries, or the mounted version. The Greenway sentries. As you can see, their stats are not anything to shout about. Their defense is still only 16. The bodyguards of some factions have a defense of 30, 28, 25, 26, and these have 16. Their attack is 6, their charge is 6, neither are particularly splendid for a bodyguard unit, but they are the best cavalry you'll get for a long time, because the merchants, I believe, apologies, I don't want to check up the EDB before I do each of these videos, because that will drain the fun even more, but I believe the merchants are after the barracks event. And Hummingbird, if you're watching, and feel free to correct me in the comments. But I think the merchants are after the barracks again. In my mind, I'm fairly certain that all 4 of these here are after the barracks event, and then as are those 2. Anyway, so there's the Breeland bodyguards, and then finally we come to the gatekeepers, a child of Hummingbird's creation. These are, and absolutely incredible. I love them. They are part of the reason why I've played as Bree so many times, and I just can't get enough of their medium tier / heavily armored crossover look that they've got going, with the awesome weapons on the backs, and their crossbows, as you can already see. Now, their crossbows not because the men of Bree are masters with the crossbow. Their crossbows because they trade. Bree is a hub of trade with the crossroads of the Great North-South Road and the passes between the Misty Mountains and Ered Luin crossing over in Bree. So they get a lot of traffic, they get a lot of ideas shared, and they get a lot of trade. And from that come the crossbows. And from that come the gatekeepers. Now, as the name suggests, these are the keepers of the gates of Bree, so they are the defenders of the gates. They inspire nearby troops, so they're going to make everyone around them better. They're very good against mounts, as you can see with this, because when they drop the crossbows, they use those halberd things as two-handed pike-style units. They're effective against armor as well. I believe that is with both weapons, not just the crossbows, so do bear that in mind. Their morale is very good. Their morale response is good. They've got a high accuracy, which is rare for humans, and excellent stamina. So they are your first and only really solidly dependable unit. But there is a downside. Whilst their melee attack is very high, their charge is good and their missile is really good. Their defense is only 16, and 10 of that is armor. So they have the stats of Gondor medium tier units, but they have the attacking stats of like berserkers and whatnot. So they're very similar to the merchants in that they are a cloud with a silver lining, because they're very, very good if you keep the enemy away from them and if they charge the enemy, and they're good against cavalry and things like that. But in prolonged melee, they will be outclassed by the elites of many of your neighbours, including the Guardians of Enedwaith, if Enedwaith manage to get them, or Dunland's chieftain units, who will outclass you thanks to Dunland's connection to Isengard. But anyway, so those are the gatekeepers. There's all of their bits and pieces there. Very interesting little unit, and again a nice little description, and quite a solid and dependable unit. And that is the roster of Bree. So let's line everyone up. I believe I've gone against Dunland in this little mini scenario, so we shall line everyone up. Again, I do not do these as if I were actually playing, because as you may have heard me say, you should not use lumbermen in your defensive line. And if you are using them in the defensive line, it normally is out of necessity more than anything else. But something else you'll notice of Bree is that they get just as many archers as they do foot units. And that is entirely intentional. You'll often find that most poorly equipped, most poor style units in Tolkien's mythology tend to use archers. So whereas in real history, I think it's spearmen are possibly the most common type of militia unit in Earth's actual history, because spears are easy to produce and they're very, very easy to get someone to hold a spear and thrust it at the enemy, whereas a sword requires a bit of training. But in Tolkien's mythology, it often seems that archers are the basic and most common style of thing, most common style of militia unit. And as Bree are a militia heavy faction, archers fill up most of their roles. Right, we'll charge these outlaws over here so they don't flank us. We'll charge whatever that is. Let's turn these off. Press enter to get rid of the green. Oh, I pressed it twice, didn't I? That's gone. That's gone, and that's gone. There we are. It's the cavalry charging. The merchant cavalry. They've not got a particularly good charge, but they've got a very good charge. And they've got quite a good charge as well. And they swap to axes when they change. Sorry, do excuse me. There's a merchant militia. Now they're both against outlaws here, so they'll likely slaughter them. Outlaws are Dunland's worst units. Probably cover Dunland next, actually, as we move on with our wild men theme, so that you can have a look at Dunland's units. There's a few new ones as well, from the creation of Dunland from Frogs to their implementation in DAC. There's a few extra units in there, including the one we're looking at right now. As you can see, our archers are peppering the enemy. How are our crossbowmen doing? I also really like their shields. I think they've got really cool shields, nice and big. The whine of the crossbow bolts piercing the sky. And there our lines have met. Dunland's army, as a brief overview before we do the real overview, is kind of split rather markedly. Before the barracks event, they are all about hordes, weak rabbles of filthy and terrible clansmen who use swarming tactics to defeat their enemy. And then after the barracks event, they actually get quite good. Thanks to their connection with Isengard, they actually pick up and they get quite good units. So they're a bit of a mixed bag. I've never played as Dunland, never in my many campaigns. Oh, our bodyguards have broken the enemy, and our merchant cavalry have broken the enemy, so charge those both in. But the Greenways are not doing too well. In fact, they are routing. But we'll go up and down the line, and then that will end this Breeland video. So as I say, I thoroughly enjoy Breeland. Oh, was the flag dying then? No, he was just getting knocked over. Keep the flag flying, fool! He's going now. No! Oh, he's just smacked him in the face with the butt of the axe. The flag has fallen. Were this a Roman army, we'd be absolutely demoralised. But anyway, there's the two lines clashing. Watchmen giving the Eisenmach all that they've got, but the Eisenmach will clear the field with them there. But as you can see, the armies do look rather similar, except we wear green and they wear brown. But otherwise, there's not too much to tell between them. And that is mostly because Dunland and Bree have a shared sort of history and past, and they are sort of cousins of one another. Mostly because obviously none of them are Dunedain. They're all men that weren't gifted the Isle of Numenor at the end of the First Age. There's outlaws on the end. So anyway, so there we are. That is the Breeland video. I do again thoroughly hope that you've enjoyed watching it. I've thoroughly enjoyed doing it, mostly because Bree is one of my favourite factions. There's all their units and their archers lining up there. As usual, if you have any questions, qualms or queries, do feel free to pop them in the comments or head over to Total War Centre. And as usual, I don't really monitor ModDB too much, so don't try and post there, but as usual, I'm probably preaching to the choir. Other than that, yeah, I hope to do Dunland next. And at the weekend, obviously, I hope to carry on with the Northern Dunedain and the Dorwinian campaign. Potentially throw Anduin in there as well. But for now, thank you very much for watching, if indeed you have. I'm Arachír Galudirithon, the head of Divide and Conquer, still very much going strong with Hummingbird and I tossing ideas around and work around at the moment. Indeed, Hummingbird is of the school of thought that perhaps the Woodland Hunters are a bit too strong, and only last week we were discussing their stats, so we are still very much at it. But anyway, for now, thank you very much for watching, and Nevar Naden Pedimad, and farewell.